Today I'd like to talk about a topic which should, at least in theory, be one of the least controversial topics out there, and that is the topic of police and policing. Of course, in the current year, given a plethora of events in recent times, we tend to have a distorted perception and view of what's going on. And a lot of that we have to thank social media for. Social media is extremely toxic, and I mean that in the actual sense of the word. It distorts our perception of things, and it makes us arrive at incorrect conclusions about the underlying reality of certain situations. And what do I mean by that? Well, specifically, I'm talking about the American situation with policing and police. And it seems, based on social media, as if there has been an uptick, a surge of police misconduct and incidents which seem to indict the police as a whole on a societal level. But when you look at the stories that are told and the spin that's put on them versus the underlying reality, which, for example, you can examine by way of statistics, which are provided by the government, or actual body cam footage. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of videos you can watch that record police activity. You get a very, very different sense of what's going on at the ground level. And this is also a form of social media, but it's not the social media spin that you would normally get. And I think it's important to discuss what the actual circumstances are that police officers find themselves in the American context. Now, being a police officer in the United States is fundamentally a very, very dangerous job, potentially and really, which is to say, there are factors in the United States that a lot of people don't understand outside of the United States, but even within the United States, that make the job perilous. What are some of these factors? Well, the biggest factor is the presence of firearms. Firearms are ubiquitous in the United States. If you count both legally owned and illegally owned, there are probably hundreds and hundreds of millions of firearms in the United States. And it's a country that is well known for being armed to the teeth, and its inhabitants, whatever you think about that, are largely very proud of that fact, and they enjoy wielding firearms, whether it's lawfully or unlawfully. And when you have a population that is armed to the teeth, the dynamic of a police officer interacting with a civilian becomes very, very different. This isn't like pulling over a grandmother in a European context in a situation where she's almost certainly not going to be armed or a threat. Because what the level of gun ownership and possession, whether legal or illegal in the United States, does is it creates a situation where any encounter a police officer has, any encounter, could potentially be deadly. And I alluded just prior to the many hundreds of videos of body cam footage and engagements of police officers with civilians. And once you've taken that in appropriately and seen enough of them, you begin to realize, as a civilian, that you really never know what's going to happen or what's going on. I've seen by now dozens of videos where it looks perfectly fine. A person's pulled over, maybe because of drunk driving, or maybe because of some foul signaling, and the person's perfectly civil, as much as one could hope, and then boom, a gun is pulled, it turns into a firefight, shots fired, and somebody's injured or even slain. There's no way you can ascertain that in advance. There's no way you can know this. Nobody's a mind reader. People don't have x-ray vision. And so every situation a police officer is going into is a situation, frankly, that could end in a very, very deadly encounter. And this is not something that is typically talked about in social media for obvious reasons, but it's something that has to be factored in. It has to be factored in. Every person in the United States is potentially very dangerous simply because of the large-scale presence of firearms. And I'm not here to debate whether it's a good or bad thing. I'm simply here stating that That is the reality on the ground in the United States. That's very different from other situations. For example, in Western Europe, where gun ownership is minimal and you have much less risk of encountering these sorts of people in general. So once you get that out of the way, you begin to realize that the mentality going into approaching people with police officers has to be one of extreme caution and guardedness at times. And that doesn't prevent them from being friendly or executing their job appropriately. In fact, if you look at the majority of cases, there is no police misconduct. And that's the other point I want to make. Police have to follow protocol. It's not as if police officers are just running around, driving around willy-nilly, deciding to accost people for absolutely no reason, just trying to do things because they think it's fun, or they want to annoy people, or get on people's nerves. No, there are protocols they have to follow. And they know the protocols. The problem, if you actually take the time to investigate this phenomenon, is that the civilians don't really know the protocols. And one of these protocols on the part of civilians probably needs to be compliance. The number one cause of conflict between civilians and police, apart from out-and-out crime, manifest crime, criminal activity, is lack of compliance. There are so many situations you can observe, if you take the time to look at them, vis-a-vis body cam and other things, that are clear signs of a lack of compliance. The police officer will say, "Show me your hands, show me your hands." Sometimes they scream it out 20 to 30 times, and there's no compliance. And when there's no compliance, we go back to the first rule in the United States that everyone is potentially lethally armed, then that creates a high-tension situation that can escalate. If you're not showing the police officer your hands, and you look like you're going for something, it might be a cigarette, but it also might be a knife or a gun. And the police officer does not know that. And it's difficult, I imagine, for a lot of people to put themselves in that situation, but I think most people could at least say that they've been in a high adrenaline situation during the course of their life, a situation that did not allow them to think and pause and properly reflect. And what happens in these high adrenaline situations, you just act, essentially. And this is the linchpin here. It's the whole problem, if you want to call it that, with so-called police misconduct. Every person is potentially armed. Every person is potentially dangerous. And you're on edge, at least in theory. Depends on the area you're obviously policing in. Much more so than you otherwise would be as a civilian. These two factors, the extreme level of firearm possession, coupled by lack of compliance, seem to be the primary reasons why you get incidents, apart from out-and-out criminal activity, obviously. Bank robbers, murderers, people that we know manifestly are criminals. And this is something that is just passing the public by, because the public is not taking the time to look at the stats, to investigate the visual situations. You'll have reporting on particular scenarios that have arisen, and I'm not going to name them because it's not necessary, that are very one-sided, that they don't describe what actually happened. And then when you take the time to look at the body cam footage, the video footage of what happened, you often realize that there is a degree of ambiguity far beyond what is being reported on. That it's not simply black and white. That someone was not simply shot for no reason. If you actually take the time to investigate these cases, it's not that simple. And a final effect here regarding social media is that things are just reported and recorded and put up on the internet far more frequently than they ever have been. Of course, decades ago, the internet didn't exist. And in total, the number of incidents of so-called police misconduct have gone down dramatically over decades. The situation has actually improved, but you wouldn't know that if you just looked at footage being presented to you online. or the social media that is trying to inflame people and agitate people and get them to go bananas. And so you add all these factors up and you have a powder keg situation. But here's the thing. The public is very much in a position to understand the nature of policing in the United States. They're very much in a position to reasonably follow the steps that involve policing, because it's all available online, without buying into the social media furor and insanity. Again, there are thousands of videos out there of police engaging in normal policing with no incidents, and there are other videos within those thousands of police engaging in normal policing that end up escalating due to lack of compliance, and it doesn't end well. Of course, there are always going to be some edge cases, and there are always going to be cases where a police officer is not acting properly, but the police are mainly acting correctly. In the majority of cases, they're acting in accordance with protocol, and the people on the receiving end, when an incident arises, more often than not, are not complying and are not following instructions. And this is something I think that civilians just need to know. Whatever you think about the police questioning you, you need to just comply in that moment. If it's actually a case of misconduct, and these things do happen, if you comply and it's recorded, then this can be taken to court, they can be sued, whatever. And this has happened. There have been instances where misconduct has been documented, but the people in question complied and everything was fine. And a lawsuit was pressed successfully. Needless to say, that doesn't happen frequently. But we've been so complacent in our acceptance of social media narratives that are ideologically driven, that do not want to take into account the underlying reality of policing in the United States, that we just think police are quote-unquote bad people. Like most people who do a certain job, most police want to do their job reasonably well. And most police probably want to become police for very specific reasons, because they think they can help or they can make a difference. So this idea that there's something fundamentally wrong with the police is insane. We can also see other situations where social media damages the underlying realities. For example, you have neighborhoods that are actually begging for a stronger police presence because these are neighborhoods that are inundated with crime, violent crime. And people are saying, no, they need less police activity, they need less policing. How is this going to work? So I think everybody needs to sit back, take a breath, take the time to investigate the underlying reality of policing in the United States. The two most important factors, as I've mentioned before, being gun possession and lack of compliance. And doing so, you can pretty much understand the vast majority of incidents that take place when police are trying to do their jobs. It's not magic. It's not pure maliciousness. It's none of these things. It's just the unfortunate situation of having to police a heavily armed population coupled by a population that does not always comply with police instructions when they should be complying. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. As always, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you've not yet done so. Hit the bell icon to make sure you're alerted to forthcoming videos. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Enjoy your weekend. May the gods watch over you. Take care and bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.